Hello and welcome to the Not So Distant Dreaming Podcast. I'm Zach, and here with us today we have Liam,
Hello.
Carter,
Hello.
and reading today will be Gus.
Greetings.
So, we haven't posted in a while. We've all been really busy, and we're gonna buckle down and actually try to get this channel going. We're gonna make a channel schedule if possible, but so yeah. And it's been a while, so I feel like reiterating this and all the stories beforehand are dreams that you've actually had.
That is correct. For the past 2 years or so, I've been having these dreams, and slowly I realized that they were all connected, all taking place in the same universe, so to speak.
All right, let's get this started.
Black Sun. Kai felt the dull, soft light from the window trickle in between his eyelids as he awoke to the world. He let his eyes slide open a bit more before warily rolling onto his stomach and stretching out his frame across his small mattress. As he moved, he felt the hard lumps and springs within jabbing into his ribs, eliciting a slight wince. He groaned softly as he sat up and reached upwards, feeling the soreness in his shoulders as he did so. He relaxed his body and rubbed the last remnants of sleep from his eyes, then ran his hand over the short, neat stubble of hair on his head. He took in the scene around him. About a dozen rows of bedding similar to his lined the floor of the warehouse in a neat grid. The only other remarkable feature of the place was the windows high above the sleeping kids, about 50 feet up the brick walls. They lined the entirety of one of the walls, and now poured in a gentle orange light. Kai barely remembered what a blue sky looked like. All he could remember were the shades of brown and orange painted across it. The soft snoring of some of those around him gave him a short moment of gratitude. At least he was waking up a bit more peacefully than the others. Just as his thought left his mind, a blaring alarm sounded, ringing throughout the cavernous walls of the warehouse. Kai saw the girl in front of him startled so badly she rolled off her mattress and smacked her head against the cold stone floor, and he heard the small yelps from farther down the row. No one moved to help the girl, who was now bleeding profusely from her nose, as she wailed in pain and moved her hands in what looked like her trying to catch the blood. Her nose was definitely broken. Kai noticed with a moment of confusion she was clutching her eye. He left his gaze shift down, and she noticed the spring sticking sideways out of her mattress and the drops of blood falling off its end. After about 5 seconds, the piercing screech of the alarm stopped, and the space was now filled with the echoes of the girl screeching. "Stop screaming, girl," Kai thought to himself. Kai rose and began walking through the rows and rows of old dirty mattresses arranged on the floor towards a set of double doors on the west wall of the warehouse, a noticeable limp in his gait. The doors, like most of the facility, were in terrible disarray, having been rusted over and its small windows shattered, leaving only pieces of jagged glass still in the frames. As Kai pushed open the doors, the hinges squealed loudly and the door grudgingly swung open to a long, grimy hallway lit only by a single flickering fluorescent bulb in the middle of it. As Kai started down the hall, he felt the last of the sunlight coming in from the large windows at the top of the wall behind him slip off his neck, and he felt a slight shiver run through him. As he continued down the hall, he heard footsteps and quiet murmurings of several others behind him. They all seemed similar in age, between 12 and 18 years old. Kai was 16, and he thought he might be close to 17, if not already there. They all wore the same thing, dark, pocketless canvas shorts and white t-shirts, most smeared through and through with dirt and grime. Kai reached the end of the hallway and pushed open a second set of doors to another room. This one was white, windowless, and fairly small, perhaps 15 feet wide and 40 feet long. There was a counter running the length of the room, and at the end of it stood a large stack of white, flavorless bars of something. Near the bars stood a single man, dressed in long, tight black clothing with a holster on his hip. He had his hair cut short and his muscles bulged out from underneath the dark fabric. He stared straight ahead, unblinking, as Kai moved past him, snatched a bar off the top of the stack and moved toward one final door, and the light from outside made him squint as he pushed it open. He made his way quickly across the small yard to the chain-link fence at the end of it and slid his back down against it, settling in to eat his meager breakfast. The enclosure was about half the size of a football field, and all dull brown dirt with several scraggly weeds interspread throughout. It was encased with a chain-link fence, and beyond that a brick wall maybe 15 feet high. Above the door that led to the yard, a staircase led up to a catwalk, where several men stood sentry, watching the 250 or so under their watch file into the yard. They would not shoot anyone who tried escaping from the yard, as the several yards between the fence and wall was essentially a trench piled high with razor wire. Kai had seen one boy try to brave it, only to get caught and dragged deep into the steely tendrils of the tangle. He remembered the boy's desperate cries for help. Now they had turned to wails of pain, and after several hours mere whimpers as he bled out. The guards hadn't moved the whole time. No one since had tried to go over the fence. Kai sat against that fence now, slowly eating the bars. He played the scene over in his head. He pulled his knees to his chest and remembered the way the body sat in the wire for weeks. A sudden series of shrieks came from inside, snapped him back into the world. He glanced up to the catwalk and saw 2 more guards emerge from a door, followed by the master. Kai guessed the master to be around 60 years old, maybe 65. He was rounded in the middle, had hard features, thick frame glasses, and a severe widow's peak that came to a sharp point. Like always, he wore a simple black suit and dress shoes, immaculately polished. His ears seemed to perk up as he heard the screams of the girl, like a predator hearing the death cry of a wounded animal. He lifted his head to one of the guards, who quickly descended down the staircase and entered the building. The master then produced a paper from his pocket, cleared his throat, and began reading from it in his deep, commanding tone. 2, 87, 145, 89, he began, listing the numbers as he went down the list. He spoke louder as the screeches of the girl worsened. 188, 115, 97. He was interrupted by a sudden gunshot. Everything sat motionless in a moment of anticipation, but when the silence persisted, the master continued down his list. 178, 22. As he continued, Kai bowed his head and tried to remember what he could about the girl. He searched his mind, trying to remember a name, but nothing came. He had slept near her for the past year, but had never spoken to her. Kai had barely spoken a word since his arrival. Talking was discouraged, in the words of the master. Every now and then, quiet whispers might be exchanged, but nothing more than that. The only offering for those bold enough to go beyond such was a brutal beating from the guards. Kai had decided it was better to maintain silence altogether, safer that way. He also tended to avoid people in general, keep his head down, and survive. 24, 65, and 17, the master finished. Kai looked up at this last number and dragged himself off the ground to follow the 24 or so others who had been called for the duty that day. A guard at the bottom of the staircase checked the bottom of their wrists and let them pass, and Kai gave a short nod as he showed the 17 tattooed on his lower arm. He followed the line heading upstairs and into the door, his limp slightly more pronounced now. The master had come out of a short hall, the end of which emptied into the second wing of the facility. It wasn't quite as large as the sleeping area, but still sizable enough. It was divided into 2 sections, each with a distinct purpose. Off to the left there was a series of pens and stables, which held around 200 sheep, all bleating loudly. On the other side was a huge, rumbling machine. The machine was known as the generator, and it was a massive temperamental device that provided all the power necessary to run the facility. Standing in front of it was an ancient man known only to them as Y. Y was almost always working on the generator, as it seemed to be near constant attention to keep running. It was truly impressive in size, a tremendous bulk of white metal with a myriad of various gauges, levers, wires. It gave off a low, deep rumble, and steam gently floated out from its top. As the teens filtered into the space, several guards roughly sorted them, pushing them to one side or the other. Of the 3 dozen or so that had been called in, Kai guessed about 28 would be assigned to the animals. As he neared the front of the line, one of the guards gave him an aggressive half-pull, half-shove in the direction of the generator. There were more kids than he expected assisting Y today. There was a small semicircle forming around him. After all the kids were sorted through, he let out a sigh and began mumbling his way through the current task. "Made an important, exciting discovery last night," he droned. "The generator has a backup secondary system that is diverting and ultimately wasting power. As you all know, it was originally photovoltaic, and the secondary system was used to store power in a series of batteries. We can almost double the amount of output if we remove this system. Luckily, the systems are color-coded, so even the simplest of creatures should be able to assist in its removal." He sighed another long sigh and launched into the specifics of the job, and Kai took a moment to look around at the 6 others with him. There were a few Kai recognized, a younger girl, a pair of older boys who looked like twins, and a small mousy girl who looked no older than 11. And then there was a girl he had never seen before. She looked to be 16 or 17, with straight, short-cut black hair and large brown eyes. She was quite pretty, and Kai found himself staring. She looked over and met his eyes and flashed a small grin. Kai quickly jerked away, averting his gaze to the floor, both fearful and embarrassed. Wide finished his rigmarole and turned to open the machine. There was a small, squat door at its base, which he swung open to reveal the guts of the great beast. Inside, it looked like a series of tunnels weaving through the various circuitry and the endless tendrils of wires, giving it the appearance of creeping vines in a dark jungle. Kai understood the job well enough. If he saw any green wires, pull them. Easy. Like any number of movies where he had to stop the bomb, avoid the live ends. He remembered the last day he had worked. He was with the animals when he heard a yelp, then what sounded like bacon sizzling. Several minutes later, a body was pulled out of the generator by the guards. It was badly burned on the arms and face, past recognition. The skin had blistered so that it almost looked like wet paper had been laid across it, crisscrossing the raw pinkness of it with veins of milk. Kai wasn't fazed by it. It didn't seem like anyone was. There had been enough burns already.
Is that
All right.
is that the break?
That is the break.
Awesome. Wow.
So, I'm just curious. This was all in your dream. Did you see this from Kai's perspective, or was this third person?
I was using Kai's perspective to kind of do it, and it's kind of weird. When I dream these dreams, I know what's happening and I know the context of it, but I'm not really in control of my actions. It's more as though I'm a passenger, but I understand their line of thinking as to why they're doing things, but I'm not active in it. I don't know it's a dream, but I'm still viewing it. It's very strange.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say I found it interesting that you could see the past context even though you just were transported into this world.
Yeah, it's kind of like they mention in Inception, where you just know that you're there and you don't have to think about what happened before.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting when I wake up, like usually I've gotten used to piecing my dreams together and how they fit into this larger picture.
Okay.
Yeah, from what I remember when I dream, because I don't remember my dreams at all. I wake up and nothing happened. I might remember it for the day, but by the next night I've already forgotten what happens. But from what I do remember, it was exactly like that for me. It was, you were a passenger. It was kind of like a thrill ride. It was from the point of view, but you had no say at all in what happened.
It's with remembering them, it's something that I've just gotten into habit to. As soon as I wake up, I write them down just to kind of, just keep it fresh in my head. And I tend to find when I start writing down, even if I don't remember a lot, more and more comes back to me.
Gotcha.
I mean, for my side of the dreams, when I get dreams, I'm in them myself. It's the world is from my view, and I'm not a passenger. I find it interesting that you're going from a passenger point of view, and like you're just absolutely no in control. Because like in a dream, you feel like you could do something more, but you don't. But for you have absolutely no control, and you're just in the eyes. I find that interesting.
Yeah, sometimes it used to be fairly scary because things would be happening and I couldn't like impose my will onto it. But eventually, I've learned just to lay back and just let things like fold out. Like I've kind of gotten to the point where my brain is used to it and it knows just to watch.
So, in the beginning, then, if like your passenger character, if they were scared, would you ever be scared? Like sometimes, if I have a really scary dream, I wake up and my heart is racing.
Oh, of course, I have dreams like that where even in these ones, like it's it's quite dark topics a lot of times, and I find myself experiencing emotions, and sometimes in the morning I'll just wake up with these emotions and no clue what dream I had. There are some dreams I can't remember, but I'm just left with the ghost of what fear it imposed upon me.
So like, what kind of feeling did you get from the gunshot? Because not many people just hear a random gunshot, and like it can be very scary.
It was strange. It was Kai had this kind of how I remember it. He had this moment of fear where he was like, he kind of flinched for a second, thought about it. A little bit of remorse for the girl, but mostly it wasn't personal to him. It's this world where that he's used to that, and he's trying to harden himself to it.
Yeah.
And something that there's this quote that was introduced to me by my humanities teacher. She talked about how in our dreams we live the lives of 1,000 people, and I think that's fairly literal for me. And it's strange, like experiencing these different parts of my psyche in these different people.
Have you ever met anyone that dreams like you do?
I have not.
Would you say there's any connection between people you know and the characters in these dreams, or is it completely out of place?
Yes, Carter, I actually, if I'm not going to lie, I thought of you as why the generator machine guy.
So some of these characters are actually like your brain is pulling them from your reality and putting them in sort of another.
And I think that's dreaming. I think my brain just does it differently. It just kind of makes more of a story around it. And sometimes like I'll think about it and I'll think, huh, this kind of sounds like this person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Very interesting.
Should
And-
we get back into it?
I just have one more question. Most dreams, the dreams, the plot is fantastic, but I was curious, how much did you have to add for literary benefit? Like, what did you have to include that wasn't actually in the dream just to make it an actually readable book?
So most of what I do, for most of it, I try to maintain the integrity of the dream and keep it as similar as I can. But if anything, I cut things out. Like
Oh.
there was a bully character in this, and I just didn't think he would make any sense. He doesn't come back in any of my other dreams. I thought it would just kind of take away from the main theme of what was going on here. So
Okay.
there's nothing that I really add. It's more just choosing what to present.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Let's launch back into it. I should warn you, the start of the next passage is a flashback scene to before the Thimble Winter, before this great ruin. So, get into it. Kai leaned against his locker, surrounded by his friends, laughing and enjoying the company before the start of their final Friday period. He took occasional breaks from their conversation to steal a glance or two at Lindsay McIntyre, who stood with her own clique a little farther down the hall. She noticed this and met his eyes with her own. Kai knows she's interested, and he definitely feels the same way. For God's sake, she's the cheerleading captain. He smiles half flirtatiously and runs a hand through his medium-length blonde hair. He looks like the California poster boy with his surfer curls and sky-blue eyes. He was a naturally gifted star of the school lacrosse team, and no slouch when it came to the academic world. He was a junior and already committed to play at Cal. One of his cohorts, Jay, noticed where Kai's attention was focused and let out a low whistle before turning to the group. "He did it," he announced sadly. "By God, boys, Kai Walker has managed to get a female to like him." This got laughter and even a few stifled giggles from the group of girls. Lindsay blushed and turned to shush her cronies. Kai sent a sharp elbow into Jay's ribs and shot him a glance. This only produced the effect of Jay going even wilder, nearly toppling over. "So it's true," he said. "Well, get your ass over there and speak to the girl." At this, the boys grabbed Kai and began moving him towards Lindsay. He resisted, but the pack had its way with him, positioning right in front of her before backing away as quickly as they had come, and a spell of steady silence and anticipation took over. Lindsay dropped her head and began to sway nervously, biting her lip coyly. Kai opened his mouth to speak, but found the words stuck in the back of his throat and found himself gaping. "What the hell am I doing?" he thought to himself. Of course this wasn't the first girl Kai had talked to, but it was Lindsay McIntyre. "Get it together, Walker," he thought, and snapped out of his momentary daze. He weakly faked a cough as though he was clearing his throat, and then spoke. "Lindsay, right?" he asked, and the boys behind him absolutely lost it. Kai ducked her head and brought her hand to hide a laugh before turning back to him. "Yeah, Kai," she returned, a playful sneer on her lips. Kai grinned and gave a curt chuckle. "So listen, I was wondering if you would maybe like to go out with me sometime." He held his breath in, drawing himself up and back as he did so. She tilted her head and seemed to consider, pouting her lips at him. She opened her mouth, but was cut off as the intercom crackled to life. Their principal came on, panicked and frantic. "Take immediate cover. This is not a drill. Take cover now." What happened next was a blur of fractured sights, sounds, and thoughts strung together. Kai headed for the nearest bathroom in a mild state of confusion, much like everyone else around him. But the confusion turned to panic as the first distant boom was heard. Then another struck, and then there was a deafening noise, and Kai was suddenly engulfed in darkness. He woke up gasping for breath, in a panic. He tried to move his legs, but they didn't budge. He became aware of the tremendous weight pressing down on him, driving him into the ground. He couldn't see anything, only black. He discovered his left arm was free, and he moved it down to his legs. There was something hard pressing on them, something else on his chest. Stone, he thought. He pushed on the weight on his chest, but it stayed. He began to breathe faster and began to yell in desperation. "Anybody, help me! Damn it, I'm stuck!" he cried, hoping someone would hear. After a moment, he yelled again, but heard nothing. He moved his arms back to his chest and tried again to move the slab pressing down on it. He screamed under the effort as he did so, and he felt it scrape the skin off his chest. He pushed harder, and it fell away, and he saw light. He now had movement of both arms and focused his attention to his lower half. He gripped the underside of the giant rock panel and lifted. He managed to get it a few inches off his legs, but then felt the pile around him shift, and his hands slipped off and the stone fell again, slamming onto his leg. But he felt something else drive into the side of his knee. He gasped in shock and felt waves of pain shooting up his leg into his chest. He reached out and found the slab again and pushed up against it. He glanced under and saw a long nail come out of his leg. He slowly pulled his legs out from under and then let the rock slam back down. He clasped his hands around his thigh and rolled up his pants to reveal the puncture. He moaned as he saw the blood gushing out of the dark hole, running down his calf into his hands and sock. He frantically looked down, feeling dizzy and trapped. He saw the hole above him in the rubble with daylight leaking out and stood up, reaching for it, but quickly collapsed back down to the ground, crying out in pain. He took a moment to collect himself, then extended his hand to pull himself up. He gingerly added weight to his injured leg, which screamed at him in agony. He tentatively climbed out and squeezed himself through the hole above him, and let the shock set in. He looked around himself and saw what hell must look like. The world around him had been reduced to a smoldering pile of smoke, ash, and rubble. Some structures stood intact, but they were far and few between. The sky was red, with black streams of clouds spread across it. What he could see through the thick smog and smoke was utter destruction, unrecognizable masses of obliteration. Among the twisted steel and concrete, he could see darker, less solid-looking figures, arranged in strange shapes. Then it dawned on him. Those were human remains. He dropped to his knees as the consequences of the decimation set in. He moved his hands up to his hair and seized fistfuls of it. He looked up to the heavens, now colored red with the blood of those around him, and let loose a long bellow. The next few hours passed in a daze. Kai wandered through the streets of what had been Los Angeles, taking it all in. He felt numb, like something was coursing through him, keeping all feelings out. He walked with a slight limp and a long strip of cloth stuffed into his leg. Slowly, the sky darkened at the onset of night. Almost instinctively, he found a relatively clear spot on the ground and curled up on it. The black of night closed in, and he felt like he couldn't even think. Gradually, sleep overtook him. He was jarred awake by yelling and low rumbling, then a bright light. He snapped awake, whipping his head back and forth. Then the light right in his eyes, and someone was barking orders. "Here's one," a gruff voice called out. Kai moved his hand out in front of his face to block the light, but then hands were grabbing him and pulling him to his feet. But he cried out as he put weight on his left leg and crumpled back down. "Damn, he's hurt," the voice exclaimed. Another voice responded, "It's fine, just get him in the truck." With that, Kai was lifted up again and his arms draped around a pair of soldiers as someone half dragged him to what Kai could make out as a large vehicle. He was moved to the back of it and lifted inside. He looked out the back to see men sifting through the wreckage with flashlights. Then he heard a soft, husky voice come from somewhere in the darkness. "Help me," it rasped. Then the flashlights were shining on an old man. He had a white beard and was dressed in rags. He crawled towards the men, wild desperation in his eyes. "Please," he croaked. "Too old," Kai heard someone say. After this, the light on the man clicked off. Then there was a bright flash and a loud bang. Moments later, the truck started up and drove off into the night. They proceeded more or less in this fashion for what Kai figured to be around 12 hours, the men combing the wreckage, collecting young survivors, and dispatching anyone who looked to be over 18. As night began to come again, they arrived at a large building that loomed ominously above them. They were ordered out of the truck to the front of it, where they were forced to their knees, the bright lights of the truck shining behind them. A pair of doors swung open in front of them, and an older man in a three-piece suit emerged. He took several steps toward them before stopping. He folded his hands behind them as he scanned them, surveying them. Then he spread his mouth and grinned before them, addressing them. "Welcome," said the master. Kai was on his back inside the generator, sifting through the jumble of wires around him. He squinted in the dark and picked out a green one and tenderly traced his fingers along it, searching for its end. He found it and used the cutters he held in his teeth to sever it. He then sat up and wiped his brow with his shirt. The air was stuffy and hot. It was loud, too, with the bleating of the sheep and the guards shouting orders. He glanced around at the few others scurrying around in the bowels of the generator, following the directions being called out by Y. He panted as he looked at their figures, occasionally illuminated by Y's headlight, like a lighthouse's light rotating around ships in a harbor. As the light flashed over the girl he had seen earlier, about 5 feet to his right, and he saw her hand reaching up towards a wire. In the dark, he saw a small spark and suddenly launched himself at her. "No!" he cried, and as he tackled her to the ground, she shrieked in surprise as they slammed into the ground. He rolled off her, clutching his knee in pain. It had landed awkwardly, and now it hurt. "What the hell are you doing?" the girl huffed angrily. "Live wire," he moaned and gestured above them. She furrowed her brow before looking upwards and saw small blue flashes erratically coming from the wire. "Oh, damn," she whispered. "Thank you." Kai nodded and felt the pain in his knee begin to recede. "What's your name?" she asked. Kai frowned at her for a moment before responding. Kai, I'm Camille, she murmured. It's nice to meet you. She looked at him for a moment, almost like she was sizing him up before smiling. She then jerked her head around before drawing close to his ear and whispering, Listen, meet me tonight in the corridor outside the main hall. Wait an hour after lights out. Kai was taken aback by this, but before he had time to formulate a response, Y appeared. What's going on back here? Y inquired as he shone the light on the pair. Camille pointed at the wire above them. Y scoffed at it and shook his head, almost if it were a shame one of them didn't end up dead from this stupidity. Camille started off after this farther back into the dark. Kai lay on his pitiful bed, staring unblinkingly at the ceiling, bathed in the dim white glow of the searchlights let in by the windows. He heard the light snoring from some of the others around him, but other than that, and the barely audible whine of the generator in the other wing, it was deathly silent. He counted the minutes off in his head, waiting for the hour to pass. He thought he was around 54 or so. With each passing moment, his heart beat a little quicker. There was no way he wouldn't be caught for sneaking around at night. He didn't even know what would happen to him if he was. No one had ever tried it before, to his knowledge. But Camille, the idea of it to her wasn't untouchable, and Kai knew it to be. He imagined the likely outcome would be a bullet to the head. What could she even hope to accomplish with such a midnight rendezvous? He kept coming up with nothing, yet something pulled on him from the inside like a string wound around his gut, trying to tug him upwards. He closed his eyes and grimaced. I will not do it. I will not do it, he thought to himself, but seemingly without conscious effort he was moving off his mattress and onto his feet, and began, as silently as he could, down the floor. The quietest he could manage with his limp was to drag the bad leg across the floor rather than pick it up. His worn sneakers made the slightest scraping sound as they moved, but to Kai it might have been a huge wave crashing against the shore. He felt his heartbeat quicken yet again as he drew nearer to his destination and moved a little faster. He came to the double doors and paused at them for a moment. He closed his eyes and calmed himself before applying the most minuscule bit of pressure he could to them. He swung them out about halfway open, moving mere inches at a time, before a small crack split the silence. A moment later, there was a minute rustling noise. He stopped and swiveled his head back to what he was sure would be the awakening of all and his impending doom. But the only sight to be found was a boy, perhaps 10 or 11, sitting up on his mattress, his large doe eyes beaming intently on him. Kai moved a quivering finger to his lips, and the boy nodded. Kai breathed a short sigh of relief and slipped back through the crack between the doors. The corridor was pitch black. He nearly stumbled as he entered it, completely disoriented. He stuck his hands out in front of him and swiped around, searching for the wall. He felt his tips brush against it and brought himself against it, pressing his chest into it. He breathed more heavily now and began shuffling along the wall as slowly and deliberately as he could. After a while of this, he stopped and listened. From farther down the hall, he could just make out the slightest huffs of breath. He opened his mouth, then paused. He could still go back now, go back to his mattress and live like he had, survive. But that same string inside his gut wanted something else. Something about Camille called out to him. Camille? His voice was the faintest whisper in the night, yet to him it sounded like thunder. A moment passed, then he heard a response. Hello, Kai, a voice returned. He then heard some shifting before feeling a hand gently placed on his arm. I didn't know if you'd come or not, she murmured, but I'm really glad that you did. What's all this about, anyway? Kai asked. We could be killed for this. Kai heard her sigh, then a long pause followed. You saved me earlier. I would have definitely fried myself if it weren't for you. What's your point? Kai pressed. You wanted to see me just to thank me again? No. Well, yes, but besides that, the whole matter just got me thinking. You could have just as easily gotten killed yourself while you were at it, you know. She got no response at this, only steady breathing. It made me think that we need to start looking out for each other. And I don't just mean you and me, but all the others as well. Kai, I don't know how each other, but I think we can do some good for one another. What do you think? There's a pause now, and Kai could hear her draw in her breath in anticipation. I think, he started, that you're crazy. He brushed her hand off him and began receding away back towards the door. Yes, I saved you. You thanked me. It's over. With that, he turned to go. Wait, she breathed after him. I'm sorry, but damn it, can you meet me again tomorrow? Here? Kai said nothing and continued onward and out, saw the young boy still staring at him.
All right.
Hold.
Want me to go while you're thinking?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So I had a question about like, you had this flashback. Did the flashback take point in the middle of your dream, or was this was before and then you transitioned into the?
It is chronological. The writing I put down is chronologically accurate.
Wow.
With the dream, yeah.
That's,
Did you,
that's
like-
weird.
You realized it once there was a flashback. You realized it was a flashback.
Yes, I did. I mean, it was this world of ruin and despair had suddenly become normal, and I thought the only way this could have happened in it for it to fit logically into the sequence of events we've seen unfold was for it to be a flashback before the Thimble Winter, when the Order destroyed the world.
Okay.
Were there any real life connections to the high school girl and Camille?
None whatsoever.
So that just happened.
That just happened.
Gotcha.
Huh.
And then Camille becomes quite the interesting character. There is a big twist in the next episode. I'm not going to spoil it for you all, but
You
just
just
so you know.
spoiled that there
You
was
really
a
did.
twist.
There's a twist.
You
I'm not saying
fool.
what it is though.
So I had a question. When Kai got stabbed in the leg by the nail, were you sore the next day after that, or did that affect you at all? Did you feel his pain?
Well, I mean, I felt his pain as much as you can feel pain in a dream, but
Okay.
it didn't affect me in the real world.
Okay, and then
This isn't the Matrix.
As he strokes his leg.
yeah,
I do have bad knees though.
true.
They do like to dislocate, so maybe there's some dream friction there.
Yeah, and then last question from my end is when Kai was walking down the hallway to go meet her. Were you hoping that he did meet her, or were you hoping that he went back to the bed, or did you have an opinion in that moment?
I was hoping he'd meet her.
Okay, all right.
I was hoping he would do something to get out of this place, because to me that just seems a terrible, dreary existence.
Okay.
Yeah. So he had that argument. He had that argument. With himself on the bed, like
Yeah.
debating if he should even risk going to meet her. Did you know the reasoning for each side? Like, could you feel
I
yourself?
could follow his line of reasoning. I could understand both aspects of where he was coming from. You know,
And you could hear his thoughts.
I could. It's not like you're hearing him speak. It's just his thoughts.
But-
It's like he's
Okay.
a part of you.
Because you're the passenger.
So it's kind of like you were reading a story about this.
Yeah, and
So just one last question for me that I thought of while we were sitting here. The boy who watches you, is he a third party that's supposed to look at like the morals of the experience, or what's his role?
he's kind of an innocent, and you see that later on in the second half of the episode. I really feel like,
Okay.
which you guys will have to tune in for next time.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for watching today. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe, and look out for more content coming soon.
Leave some suggestions in the comments for what this YouTube channel would be, because we need more content than just podcasts, and we're looking for ideas.
Also, look out for some new merch. We're going to submit some designs, and if you guys like it, we'll start selling it. And again, thank you.